The most difficult question you'll be asked in your practical cake craft exam is to evaluate. So what is an evaluation? An evaluation is simply you evaluating if an ingredient is a good or bad addition to a cake, evaluating if a cake is suitable for a particular type of occasion, and also evaluating if a plan of work is in a suitable order. For example, you might be asked to evaluate the use of butter in a lemon drizzle cake. You might be asked to evaluate a plan of work for making a Victoria sponge cake. Or you might be asked to evaluate the suitability of a heavily fruited cake as a wedding cake. In the next few slides, we're going to go through each of these questions and we're going to go through the evaluation progress. So what is the answer structure for an evaluate question? It's exactly the same as if you're in HFT or practical cookery. For 1 mark, you need to include a fact. So that's a description of the function of the ingredient, a function of the cake, or something about the recipe step. So that's just a very short fact or description. The next thing you need to include is an opinion. So is this a good or bad thing? Is it a suitable or unsuitable thing? And finally, we need to give a consequence or a reason why this is a good or a bad addition. Essentially, you are just explaining, but you're adding in an opinion. So is this a good or a bad addition? So we've got an example here. You're being asked to evaluate the suitability of a rich fruit cake as a Christmas cake. So remember, a fact is a description about the suitability of this cake for Christmas. We need to give an opinion, so is this a good or a bad thing? And a consequence, so why is this a good or a bad thing? So for our fact, we could be writing something along the lines of a rich fruit cake is a traditional choice for a Christmas cake. Remember, just the same as in practical cookery or HFT, we always want to be being specific to the person, product or cake that is in the question. So we're being asked about a rich fruit cake, so our answer should have the words rich fruit cake in there, and we want to be evaluating for a Christmas cake. So we're saying if this is a good or a bad thing for Christmas. Our opinion, we're saying it's a good thing, and then our consequence is us just explaining why we think a rich fruit cake being a traditional choice for Christmas is a good thing. So we might say something along the lines as guests would expect or enjoy it. Once we've done all 3 of those things, we are then getting 1 mark. So you need to give all 3 parts of that answer in order to get a mark. Another example for this question, for our fact, so remember that's a short description, we might want to say something along the lines of so we have another example here. So remember, we're still given a fact, an opinion and a consequence. So our fact is a short, snappy description. So we could be writing something along the lines of that a rich fruit cake typically contains alcohol. Our opinion, is this a good or bad thing? We're saying it's a good thing for a Christmas cake. So remember, we're being specific to the scenario in the question, which is all about Christmas. Our consequence, we are then explaining why we think it's a good thing that a rich fruit cake typically contains alcohol. So our reason for that is that it means the cake will last for longer, meaning it can be made in advance. We've got a fact, an opinion and a consequence, which means we now have got 1 mark for the answer that's on the screen right now. We might also want to add in something called a developed consequence into our answer. So just a reminder, for 1 mark, we need to give a fact, an opinion and a consequence. Sometimes you might know a bit of extra information though, and that's where a developed consequence comes in. So that's you giving another reason why you think this is a good or a bad thing. If we give a developed consequence, we will also get a mark for that. So again, we're sticking with the same question about the rich fruit cake and evaluating it for Christmas. So we might be going with the answer that we had before about the rich fruit cake typically containing alcohol. We're saying that's a good thing for Christmas time because it means it's going to last for longer, so we can make it in advance. So we're getting 1 mark for that answer, but we know a little bit of extra information. We're going to add in an additional consequence known as a developed consequence. So we could be saying that this gives additional time for decorating. So we've now got another mark for this answer. So we've got 2 marks for the answers that are on the screen. If you find yourself wanting to write the exact same fact and opinion because you've got something else to write, that's when you want to be adding in that developed consequence. Don't be wasting time writing out the exact same fact and opinion, just add in your developed consequence after your consequence. So you might be wondering, what is it I need to be evaluating about an ingredient or a baked item? So as I said at the start, it's just you saying what is good about that ingredient or the baked item and what's bad about that particular ingredient or cake. So we're thinking along the lines of flavour and colour, cost, so is it low cost, high cost, is it expensive or cheap? Does it have a long shelf life or quite a short shelf life? Is there any added nutritional benefits to it? What are the tastes like? Is it quite a mild flavour? Does it give a lot of flavour? Is that going to be suitable or unsuitable for particular settings? What is the preparation like? That would mostly be applicable to a baked item. So can you make a large portion of it? Can you have multiple tiers? Is it something like a cupcake where you would only be making a small portion at a time? Another type of question that you might encounter is evaluating a plan of work in your exam. So you'll be given a plan of work or really just the recipe method, and then the question might be something along the lines of evaluate this plan of work for making a Victoria sponge. So you're given steps 1 to 10. What I would recommend in your exam is just making a few brief highlights, underlining things or making a few notes, going through each stage and saying what's good or bad about these particular stages. So for example, some good points that we've got from this recipe is they're creaming the margarine and sugar together. Some bad points, however, is they've not added the flour and egg in gradually. They've not lined the tins or preheated the oven before we started making the cake. There's not a test for readiness given. We're not allowing the cakes to cool slightly before we're turning them out. And we're also not allowing the cakes to cool before we're adding the whisked cream. So we've got some examples coming up on the screen. Just a reminder, the question was about a Victoria sponge cake, so we want to be including those, we want to be being specific to that product in our answers. So for example, we could say that the oven is preheated too late, which is our fact. Remember, the fact is just your short, snappy description. You are just taking that information straight from the plan of work or recipe that you're given. Our opinion is that it's a bad thing, and remember our consequence is you explaining why that would be a bad thing. So we could be saying something along the lines of the cake will be sitting for too long, meaning the air is lost. So we've got our first mark after that. We then might want to be adding in a developed consequence for our second mark. So why is it bad that the cake is sitting too long? Why are we losing air? Why is that even worse? So a developed consequence for additional mark would be something along the lines of causing the Victoria sponge to be dense. Remember, we want to refer back to the product, which is Victoria sponge, which we have done in the developed consequence. So that means we will get both marks. Our second answer is our fact, so we're taking that straight from the recipe, is that there's no test for readiness has been given. We're saying this is a bad thing as our opinion, and then our reason for this being a bad thing, as the Victoria sponge could be underbaked. So again, we've got all 3 parts to our answer. If we had not put in Victoria sponge, so we've scored out the word cake and we've put Victoria sponge instead, which means that we will have the mark now. However, if we just kept it as it is and just said cake, we would not get a mark for this because we're not being specific to the Victoria sponge cake. Another example, so we are simply saying for a fact the Victoria sponge hasn't been cooled slightly before turning onto a cooling rack. Our opinion, this is a bad thing, as it may crumble at the edges when hot. Another answer that we could give, so we're going for a positive this time. Your evaluations can all be negative, they can all be positive, or they can be a mixture of both positive and negative. So for our last answer, we're going for a positive, and we're saying that the margarine and sugar has been creamed together as our fact. We're saying this is a good thing for the Victoria sponge cake. Remember, we have to refer back to Victoria sponge cake in our answer. And our reason why this is a good thing is it will help to trap air, helping it to rise. So we've given a consequence there, which means we've ended our answer on 1 mark. We also know a little bit more information that by trapping this air and helping the cake to rise, this will create a light and fluffy texture. So we've added in a developed consequence, we know a little bit more information, so by adding that in, we have gained a 2nd mark for that answer. Our final type of question might be asking you to evaluate particular ingredients and why they would be beneficial or not beneficial in certain types of baked items. So the example question that we're going to go through now is evaluate the use of butter when making a lemon drizzle tray bake. So it's a 4-mark question and we're going to go through some example answers. So we have an example on the screen right now. Butter is good as it retains moisture, so keeping the cake moist and helping it last longer. So remember, a fact is just a short, snappy description of what butter does in the product. So we are starting off by saying for a fact that butter retains moisture. We then want to go in with our opinion. So is this a good or bad thing? And this person has started off with their opinion, which is absolutely fine. So we're saying butter is good. We then want to be given a reason why it's a good thing that butter is retaining moisture. And this person has said, so keeping the cake moist and helping it last longer. Remember, we need to be referring back to the product that is in the question though. So although this answer has got a fact, an opinion and a consequence, they're not going to get a mark at this stage. So we need to replace the word cake with lemon drizzle cake because that is what our question is asking us about. Once we've done that, we now have our mark for our answer. We have an answer on the screen right now. We have got a fact that butter has a better colour. We are saying for our opinion that this is a good thing, and the reason for it being good is the lemon drizzle cake may have a more appealing appearance and be more likely to be eaten. So we've got a fact, we've got an opinion, we've got a consequence, we've referred back to lemon drizzle cake, so we've got a mark for this answer. If we wanted to add in a developed consequence, we want to be going in with another reason why we think it's a good thing that butter has a better colour, or we want to be going into more detail about why it's a good thing that the cake's going to be more likely to be eaten. So we're going to say that this is going to help reduce food waste, so that's your developed consequence, and you've now got 2 marks for the answer shown on the screen. We have an answer on the board here saying that butter is unsuitable as it can be expensive, so it will be unappealing. So we do have a fact that butter is expensive, which is correct. We've got an opinion by saying that butter is unsuitable. However, our consequence, so it will be unappealing, doesn't have enough detail in it. So we need to make sure and improve this answer. So we'd be wanting to write something along the lines of, so it will mean people on limited incomes will not be able to use butter in their lemon drizzle cake. Remember, we always want to refer back to the product that's in the question, which is the lemon drizzle cake, so make sure you've got that in your answer. And now we have got a mark for that answer. So if we were to put all of those examples together, you would get your 4 marks for your question. Evaluate the use of butter when making a lemon drizzle tray bake. So butter is good as it retains moisture, so keeping the cake moist and helping it last longer would be our first mark. We have 2 marks for our second answer about butter having a better colour. And then we've got our fourth and final mark about butter being expensive. So on the screen here, you have got your 4 mark answer for the question. So our top tips when we are asked to evaluate in our exam. Remember, we always want to follow the answer structure. So you want to give a fact, an opinion and a consequence for 1 mark. So you need to have all 3 parts of that answer to get 1 mark. We can give a developed consequence for an additional 1 mark, but they are optional. So if you don't know more information, you don't need to add it in, that's fine. You're always going to be given a product or a scenario in the question, so make sure you're referring back to it. Whether it's a Victoria sponge cake, lemon drizzle, a rich fruit cake, is a scenario, is it for a child's birthday party, is it for Christmas, etc. Finally, always look at your mark allocation. If you have got a question that's worth 4 marks, then you can structure your answer in a couple of different ways. You could give 4 fact, opinion, consequences. You've got 1 mark for each of them. All 4 of them together will give you a total of 4 marks. If you know quite a lot of information about the facts that you're giving, then you can give 2 fact, opinion, consequences and develop both of those answers by giving a developed consequence, and that means you will get 2 marks for your fact, opinion, consequence and 2 marks for your developed consequence. You might also want to write 3 fact, opinion, consequences, but you know that you know a little bit more information about one of those facts, so you can add in a developed consequence to that answer, meaning that you'll get 3 marks for your fact, opinion, consequence and an additional 1 mark for the developed consequence.